Hey family, welcome to this week's Extended Cut. Pastor Chris here with my man Casey Olsen, and this week we're going to be doing what we do every time with the Extended Cut. We're going to be taking a deeper look into this previous Sunday's message, looking at some of the contextual things that maybe didn't fit into the message, and maybe some more application points and information that as we have pondered this amazing word that Casey brought last Sunday, have come up. And so I do want to stop you right here, though, and say if you have not yet listened to this week's sermon, go ahead and go do that. It's at gracecityeugene.com. You can go to the sermons tab, and this message is titled God with Us. So make sure you catch the message. Otherwise, a lot of this stuff just won't make as much sense to you. So get that done. That's your alert. So we're going to start off with Casey giving us a recap from this amazing message he brought to our family this last week. So
Awesome.
Take it away, Case.
Awesome. Yeah, this weekend we opened up our Advent sermon series called O Come, Emmanuel, based off the famous hymn. And kind of the whole idea about this is we're addressing the four common themes, or the four focused themes of the Advent season: hope, peace, love, and joy, and how Jesus provides all of those things to a world that was in need of a Savior, in need of a Messiah, and still is today. And so I got to kind of open us up for this, and kind of my sermon, the whole idea of it was just trying to introduce us to this idea of Advent. Our church has never really taken time to focus on it for an entire season like this. And the truth is, Christmas was a long time ago. Yeah. Anytime you just jumping back into a significant topic, it's totally appropriate and really effective to spend a week to kind of say, hey, what are we getting ourselves into? And so for me, what I tried to do this week was we looked back at the 400 years of silence, the intertestamental period between the Old and New Testament, where we didn't see God moving in the same way that he had historically through the people of God, the Israelites. And but at the end of that, there was this promise that a Messiah was going to come, that he was going to turn the people's hearts, and that he would give people the opportunity to turn back to the Lord before eventually judgment will come. And so we looked at this period of time, and we considered, what does it look like for us in a world where we can resonate with a lot of the brokenness and the chaos that they experienced, and even maybe sometimes that feeling of where is God in the midst of all of this? But at the end of it is hope. At the end of it is joy, is love, is peace, and that's promised all through Jesus. And so kind of my whole sermon was just to try to point back some similarities between some of the chaotic brokenness that we see back in the world that Jesus entered into with what we've got going on, what we've been through for the past couple of years, and pointed us to try to see that Jesus is the answer to all of our questions, and he is the solution, not just a solution, or not just a decent solution. Yeah. He is the solution to everything going on. And the heart of it was we need this as followers of Jesus who have been through the last couple of years, and the folks in our lives that don't know this need this message too. And good. So that was kind of the heart of the message.
You said something there that I think definitely applicable to this message, but really applies to the entirety of our lives as Christians and as Jesus followers, not being an option, a decent option, a potential option, an item on the menu of what I can do any given day, but it's the option.
Yes.
Jesus is the way to God, right? And there's so many options out there that as humanity, we can get fatigued with in our heads, always trying to figure out what's the best option, what's the best this, and there's just something to the peace and the rest that comes with settling in that place. No, this is the option. Yeah. Best option.
Absolutely.
Following Jesus, being in his family, committing to serving and growing in him. It's the option.
Yep.
And that really stuck out to me, because so much of what we try to preach and communicate to folks is that heart of no, this is the only way.
Yeah. Yep.
And that actually brings liberty.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
No,
Especially when everything else is bound to fall and fail. Like it's not going to be sufficient. It's not going to be good enough. It's going to let you down not only in the scope of eternity, but it's going to let you down in the temporary too.
Yeah.
Like one of the examples I talked about was there's been a significantly higher recorded numbers of drug overdose related deaths in 2020 and 2021 because in the midst of emotional and psychological pain that so many people are experiencing over the last couple of years, that's what they're turning to for relief. And we're seeing more overdose related deaths, and it's so sad. And it's easy to look at something like big and tragic like that, but it happens in the really small things, the small coping devices too that we turn to, and social media addictions are so real. And all these different kinds of things that they will always let us down. They will never be enough. And we're going to constantly be chasing after it. So Advent helps us reorient ourselves back to the only true solution really for all this.
That's great, man. So typical questions we go through with these every week, right? What was the most difficult thing for you in putting this together, this message?
Yeah, I think I chose to spend a lot of time reflecting on the last couple of years. Really felt the Lord pushed me to do that and to go through a significant list of significant events in and outside of our region. Mm-hmm. And that was a sobering exercise to go through. And it was difficult because as I mentioned at the end of that long list, it didn't even scratch the surface of everything. I was finding different lists from news publications and articles of key events and all these kinds of things, and it could not do enough justice to the full scope. And then you think about all of the specific individual nations that are having their own events going on, their own changes. There's literally so much has been going on for the past couple of years, and is always going on. But we're particularly feeling the weight of it. I think choosing to go through that in that way was kind of daunting because, we tend towards escapism, going back to the social media addiction type thing. We like to step out and not have to think back to the difficulties, the challenges, the trials. We're I don't want to think about 2020. I just want to move on. And it's don't include that in my sermon. Even somebody in our church came up to me afterwards and said, at first, I really didn't like that when you were getting into that. I don't want to think about that stuff. I don't want to talk about that stuff. So that was difficult to go there because it is discouraging. It's not a super happy thing. And people are kind of sick of talking and thinking about it. But it's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's really good. Well, on the flip side of that, what brought you the most joy in preparing the message?
I think just knowing that we're setting up for some really, really cool and important conversations for the next few weeks. If this is the solution, that is going to be such good news for our hearts who need it so badly, for people in our lives who don't believe in this, who aren't into this, and that's really exciting. If this news is as good as we believe it is, that's really exciting. That's really awesome. And I think for me, sometimes you go through an experience, a great social outing after maybe you haven't hung out with your friends in a long time, and you get back home and you're like, man, I really needed that. That was such a great time with these friends. That was such a great experience, something I've just been missing for so long. And as I was preparing this message, I just had this overwhelming sense of God wants to do something through this series that we've just needed for a long time, a hope and a joy and a peace that we've just not experienced in so long, and maybe have kind of forgot a little bit or made too mundane or too redundant in our lives that we forget how special it is.
Yeah. And maybe we know it but haven't attached it to this season for some time, right? Yeah. And I think that as a community, we talk about this a lot, but it's attached to a lot of different ideas, themes, things we're going through. And to bring it into this season, I think is definitely something that has been not intentionally in any way, but it just hasn't been a focus.
Sure.
And so I echo that. I think God's going to do some really cool things from this.
And I think it's just good news to dive into something like this more intentionally in a season that like isn't picture perfect. Like the cultural values that we have for holiday seasons, as fun as they are, like they also let us down. And there's like a lot of folks out there like have awkward family dynamics that they're walking into. There maybe don't have any family dynamics to walk into. Like there's so many different things about this season, as much joy as there is in like seasonal foods and drinks at Starbucks and lights on all the houses. Like there's so much fun, but there's also a lot of hurt in this season too. And so like leaning into something like this is so great in a season that does have a complex list of emotions and feelings for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, that's really good, man. So as you were putting this together, I can only imagine, especially as you're drawing from different resources, trying to unpack, the intertestamental period and some similarities with just where we've been and all that. You probably have a lot of stuff that didn't fit.
Yeah. Some
thoughts maybe that, gosh, that's profound, but it's not for Sunday.
Yeah.
What kind of contextual or application types of things didn't make the cut? Yeah. And maybe you've saved it for the extended cut. But yeah, what else has been working in you through this?
Yeah. I think something that didn't necessarily fit in the theme of wanting to just really kind of like lay a groundwork for what we're stepping into. But that was so evident in my research as I was preparing for this sermon, is that like God clearly works while we're waiting. And like it's easy to look at the 400 years of silence, especially if like you resonate with that. If that's maybe you've been in a season where you like are feeling like God's felt a little distant, or why doesn't he move the way he used to? And it's really easy to begin to question and be a little concerned about like, what is God doing in these seasons where I just like feel abandoned? But what was so cool to read and learn about was that even though God wasn't moving in some of the same ways that he had been moving throughout Israel's history, it doesn't mean that he wasn't moving. And it doesn't mean that he wasn't working to do some really, really special things in and through that time period. And a couple of those included what happened with Alexander the Great. As he was raising up a nation, he was becoming this dominant world power, and he became obsessed with a couple different ideas. The first was that he was obsessed with creating a one world language so that as he issued decrees, they could go out to the world and be understood by anyone. They didn't have to go through interpreters. He just wanted to be able to send out anything and everything to the world around him and it be able to be understood. And then secondly, he also invested a ton of time and energy and resources into developing a more simplistic and effective road system throughout the known world. Travel was dangerous, as we often talk about in some of these stories, like certain routes in the ancient world were notorious for you're going to get robbed, you're going to get hurt, you're going to get threatened. Like travel in the ancient world was not safe and was not always easy. And Alexander the Great was like, we're gonna make that better. And so during this 400 years, you see this crazy modernization of the world because of the empire that Alexander the Great rose up. But what's really cool about that is like God would end up being glorified by those means a couple hundred years later, because the language that Alexander the Great helped formalize throughout the world as like a very common language was Koine Greek, which is what most of the New Testament was written in and passed off. The roads that Alexander the Great helped create, making it much, much easier and safer to travel the world, were the same ones that the apostles and their disciples would go on to share the gospel and to create more churches in different regions and different cities. And so like in this season, God was doing something, and he was working, allowing different things in the world to go on that eventually were going to be used for his glory. We're going to be used for his purposes. And so, like, if we find ourselves in these seasons of waiting, like, God is still doing something really special. And who knows what in 10, 15 years, or maybe someday when we step into eternity, when we get to look back throughout our life, we get to see that, like, God was doing something really special in these different seasons where we don't really see it because maybe it's a little different. Maybe it's not what we hoped it would be. Yeah. But, like, we get to look back and be like, oh, wow, like, that happened, and then this was allowed, and that was enabled or empowered. And that was just such an encouraging thought to me that, like, it was 400 years of silence, but it really wasn't, because God was moving, God was working, and so many of the advancements that happened in that period through the political and geographical turmoil that the Israelites had to experience would end up just being like a catalyst for launching the gospel all around the world.
Oh, that's really cool. I think you kind of made a correlation in your message to this, but similarities to some of our conversations about in being in exile, right? Yeah. But much longer, obviously. Yes. But that idea in our previous sermon series of in the suffering and hardship and trials, there's preparation for what is to come. And you see that throughout in scriptures, right? But we don't like to think about that. No. And I believe that all of these things just continue, like, it always makes me remember, this is why God tells his people, remember. Yep. Remember. Yep. Remember. Not like, don't forget my favorite color or don't forget to do your chores, but no, remember what I have done through my people and for my people, and, like, the faithfulness that there is, that it may be a couple generations later, but God is so faithful. And that's the thing that you mentioned, like, just our immediate gratification, that we live in this lack of patience and desire to wait. But the remember is never just a call to, like, hey, remember last week? It's like, no, remember generations. Yeah. And then you get this perspective of the forbearance, long-suffering faithfulness, right? Of like God over time. And I just think that's so important. Like, remember, what was the status of your family a couple generations ago? Yeah. What miracles has he worked through family lines and legacies that, like, could only be from God? Yeah. And so I really like how you unpack that and drew some of that correlation. But this exile idea is a short timer's version of the intertestamental times. Yes. And I think there's just there's a lot for us to correlate there. But remembering is such a big deal. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's such a big deal. And so I like how you went there and your thoughts on that, for sure.
Thanks, man.
Anything else that been sticking out, or I know that was a big one.
Yeah, that was a big one. I just continue to just really lean into this belief and idea that this is such good news for the people around us. We as believers get these reminders every year as we attend our Christmas Eve service, and we do these different kinds of routines and rituals as followers of Jesus. But man, how fresh this news is, and how good it is in the context of how broken the last couple of years have been. And some of these things that we talk about, like, I even think about, like, some of these, like, dangerous solutions that people will turn to. We often think that, like, none of my friends or family members would turn to drugs. None of them would turn to this, but they're oftentimes not that far off from choosing those kinds of things. And I don't say that, like, as a scare tactic, like, but it's real. Like, when they, like, we as humans are always trying to fill this God-shaped hole in our hearts with anything that can kind of deceive itself to believe that it will. And we'll just keep searching. We'll just keep trying. And how about, instead of just allowing people to continue on trying to fit things into that God-shaped hole that's not supposed to be, like, we do our best to figure out, like, we got to get them around our people. We got to get them to a Christmas Eve service for them to hear the gospel preached. Like, we got to be serious about this, because, like, after the last couple of years that we've had, like, people are just leaning into so many different things that are unhealthy, that are unhelpful, and that are going to cause a lot of like destruction and pain in their life long term. And that's very sad.
It is. Yeah, and like I'm a preacher, so I'll preach for a sec, but so many people need to hear this news, right? And like if you're watching this, it's probably not because you're just trying to figure out about Jesus. You're probably like a disciple following him. You probably listen to the message. You're wanting to catch more about this. But the reality is there are dozens, if not hundreds of things, substances, relationships, sinful habits and patterns that are competing for every individual's attention, allegiance, and worship. And if we believe we have the answer, not an answer, who are we to not be sharing that with people? And I want to encourage you as we come into this Advent season and this holiday season, there are going to be uncomfortable relationships and conversations that happen because I don't know anyone that has a perfect family or a perfect friend group or whatever it is. There's going to be those. But if you're watching this and you know and believe in Jesus and the hope, peace, love, and joy that came along with him and his sacrifice here on earth, you have the best news anybody can receive this season. Yeah. And I just want to encourage you, like, if you are not sharing that, something else is going to compete for that worship and allegiance in that person's life. And you have the best news that they can hear. And I just want to encourage you, share that. Yeah. Like, don't keep it to yourself. Like, we have no right to keep that to ourselves. And that's why we do things like basketball games to get people involved in community, a Christmas Eve service that can be a little more approachable for people who aren't used to coming to some sort of religious like meeting or gathering. And I'm just really praying that through this season and focusing on these things, that for each of us, we would be emboldened and encouraged to really share the hope that we do have in Jesus.
Amen.
So, that's all I got.
That's all I got.
Yeah. Well, bless you guys. It's great to have this conversation with whatever, however you want to call it, but it's great to be able to dive deeper into this stuff and invite you into this time today. So I pray that you're encouraged. I pray that you will heed the call to share this glorious news with anyone God would give you a voice to speak into their lives. And it's my prayer. I'll say it's our prayer that this glorious news of a Jesus who saves and brings hope in the midst of chaos, trials, and suffering would be spread to everybody and would bring transformation in our city and beyond. So thank you for joining us for the extended cut this week. We hope you have an amazing Thanksgiving, and we look forward to seeing you all this Sunday.
No podcast on Friday, by the way. We're
that's right.
Usually fourth Friday of every month, Marriage Matters podcast. We're going to hit pause on that because it's a short week, different things like that. So no podcast Friday, but we've got a great one for you the following Friday, Friday of next month.
That's right.
Maybe we'll keep it under wraps.
Keep it under wraps.
But it's going to be a good
Marriage still matters.
It does.
But it's just not coming out this week. We'll see you guys Sunday.